What if I told you that the key to solving any issue isn't really all that complicated? That the ability to shape our surroundings is a skill resident within each individual? Sound too good to be true? Well, I'll give you some time to ponder that and get back to it later. Hi, I'm Justin Reddick, and today I'm going to talk about how the discovery of this key helped shape my life and forever changed my perception of the world. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Australia as a part of a large biannual exercise called Talisman Sabre. This would be my first of many engagements with a foreign military and the beginning of a long and storied relationship with the Australian Defence Force. Little did I know how much the exposure of the inner workings of another military would shape me as a military officer. While there, I was surprised to see how much emphasis was placed on personal relationships, both on the civilian and military sides. I witnessed things that used to be commonplace in the United States, but over time have begun to vanish from our society. For example, shops and stores close promptly around 6 p.m. during the week and around 2 to 3 p.m. on Sundays. When looking at this from an American's perspective, an initial reaction may be to claim that this practice is inefficient. Why should stores dictate when I'm able to shop, right? But when you stop to consider that this is a cultural thing, that by regulating hours, people have more time to spend with their friends and family, it begins to make more sense. What's even more interesting is that with this kind of practice in place, efficiencies do not decrease, but rather increase. Let me share another example with you. Having just returned from a visit to the Australian Command and Staff College, I was further intrigued to learn that every day at 10 a.m., the entire school takes a break for morning tea. You might be asking yourself what this has to do with my original point. Well, here it is. Practices that are ingrained within a culture, like shops closing early or a deliberate break for morning tea, all serve to accomplish the same goal, and that is the building and strengthening of personal relationships. A strong focus on personal relationships gives us all the opportunity to solve any issue and shape our surroundings. Still not convinced? Well, then consider this. Unless you've been living under a rock, you likely have experienced some or all of the following. At around the age of 5, you likely began going to some type of formalized schooling. Over the next 12 or so years, depending on the level of emphasis, you would have regular interaction with your peers. Friendships would be formed, and social interaction would become a normal occurrence. In this environment, if you needed to address a problem or issue, you could work it out amongst your peers. Generally speaking, depending on the problem or issue, once a solution was found, it would not be a stretch to assume that the surroundings would then reflect the agreed upon compromise. This process even worked so well that it became commonplace as you transitioned to your adult life, right? Everything was sunshine and rainbows, right? Well, not likely. Well, why is that? Well, I submit to you that our ability to solve problems and issues decreases as we get older because we do not have a culture in place that encourages personal relationships. I know that's a bold statement, but I believe there is a direct correlation between resolving conflict and a foundation of strong personal relationships. Having spent some considerable time in Australia, this is the one thing that stands out most to me when you compare our two countries. While it may be convenient to not be constrained by business hours in America, this is just one example of how our two countries differ. If you were to ask the average Australian why this practice is in place, many would likely respond that it's just the way things are. I would even venture to say that an American, when asked the same question, would respond in kind. But observe the same individuals in their everyday lives, and you may notice a difference. When a culture is present that fosters a sound emphasis on personal relationships, it requires active resistance to not reap the benefits. So what does this have to do with my example of the Australian Command and Staff College taking a deliberate break each morning for morning tea? Well, unlike civilians who may not realize that the culture they live in is designed to foster strong personal relationships, the military leadership of the Australian Defence Force understand this concept implicitly. Therefore, they provide the vehicle for these relationships to flourish on a daily basis. I was amazed to see the level and breadth of conversations that developed in a 20-minute period over a cup of tea. I personally even found myself engaged in a fascinating conversation about the South China Sea with international students attending the course from the nations of Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. Once it ended, I thought to myself how unlikely it would be for a similar conversation to occur here at the U.S. Command and General Staff College. But whereas a thought like this in the past would have been temporary and fleeting, I now knew why. It is because the U.S. Command and General Staff College does not take the deliberate steps to create a culture that fosters strong personal relationships. Don't get me wrong. I think the potential for the same outcome exists here at the U.S. course, just as it does at the Australian course. But the difference is that we don't capitalize on it, simply because it's not part of our culture. Those of us that get to spend a year here with a group of our peers have a unique opportunity to build strong personal relationships that extend to other services, our interagency friends, and our international partners. These relationships can be strengthened over time and have the potential to help solve any problem or issue. Imagine just for a second that the U.S. and its allies were engaged in a unified effort against a common enemy. How nice would it be to reach out and contact a former colleague and have a candid conversation about shared objectives, outcomes, and risk? Some might argue that this already takes place, but my counter-argument is that it is not usually our first inclination, and considerable time and resources are wasted until we ultimately arrive at this conclusion. Moving forward, we have the collective potential to change the culture of our military for the better. The Australian Defence Force understands this, and the leadership works hard to ensure that it remains part of their culture. I believe that this is one area that the U.S. military can greatly benefit from if it chooses to. It won't happen overnight, but give it some time and I bet you'd be amazed at the difference. A wise man once said, "Nothing worth doing is ever easy." Well, I believe that this is worth it, and the collective rewards can be priceless. Thank you.